You guys have lineup decisions, and I have answers for you. Welcome to Matchups That Matter Week 2, where we're going to break down everything you need to know to set your best fantasy lineup in Week 2 of fantasy football, from games to target, over-unders, implied point totals, pace, DVOA, where the sharp money is betting right now, shadow matchups, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends with good matchups, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends with bad matchups this week, even some defense and kicker talk for those of you guys who play in some prehistoric leagues right now. So if you enjoyed any point, leave a like, subscribe if you're new around here. Now let's get into it. All right, so as always, if you guys want access to this information and our weekly rankings, that is linked down below in the pinned comment. If you guys got a really tough start or sit decision this week, or maybe a couple start or sit decisions, what I recommend doing in this video is getting a piece of paper and a pen and putting one column Jordan Addison, right column George Pickens, and kind of going through the pros and cons of each start and each sit in that situation. We're never going to bat 1,000 with this stuff because fantasy football is inherently very variant, and there's going to be stuff that we get wrong all the time, but good process should win out in the long term. So let's start with the games in week 2 that have the highest over-under. You guys can see the top 5 on the screen right now. We have the Jags-Chiefs game, the Vikings-Eagles game, of course, that is kicking off tonight, Detroit Lions and Seattle Seahawks, Buffalo Bills and Las Vegas Raiders, and Miami Dolphins and New England Patriots on Sunday Night Football. And then we have the games with the lowest over-unders, the Cowboys-Jets, the Browns-Steelers, the Broncos-Commanders, the Texans and Colts, and the Cardinals and Giants. Again, how you want to use this information is basically, let's say you're deciding between Jackson Smith-Njigba and Elijah Moore. You see that the Browns-Steelers game is a 38.5 point over-under, one of the lowest on the slate, whereas the Seahawks and Lions game is a 47.5 point over-under, one of the highest on the slate. If that is your decision point, and it's a close decision, which I would say those two players are, then you want to use the tiebreaker of the fact that it's a better game environment, higher scoring atmosphere, and that kind of thing. So implied point totals, basically these are derived from the over-unders and the spreads. According to Vegas right now, Buffalo Bills, Philadelphia Eagles, Kansas City Chiefs, Detroit Lions, and San Francisco 49ers are implied for the most points according to Vegas. So again, if you're caught between a start-sit decision, lean towards players from these teams and probably sit some of the players from these teams. The Jets, the Giants, the Commanders, Steelers, and Panthers are the lowest implied point totals. I know I'm going to get a lot of Garrett Wilson questions this week, but just because the implied points for the Jets is 14.5 doesn't mean I'm not still starting this guy as a top 24 wide receiver, because in fantasy football, of course, you always want to start your studs regardless of what the quarterback situation is, regardless of the offensive environment. If you have other great options, yeah, that's when you sit Garrett Wilson, but for the most part, you are definitely going to be starting him. So where the sharps are betting right now. So the sharp money, as you guys can see on the screen, basically this is the percentage of the cash that's on the over or the under, because we are concerned with how many points are going to be scored as fantasy football players. The Kansas City Chiefs and Jacksonville Jaguars game, already one of the highest over-unders on the slate, has all of the steam on the over right now, 96% of the money. Rams and 49ers, a lot of the steam on the over as well. Eagles and Vikings tonight, a lot of steam on the over. I personally laid some cash on the over in tonight's game. And then the Detroit Lions and Seattle Seahawks also has a bit of money on the over. So again, tally up your columns, make sure you're following along with all this stuff. And then when it comes to over-unders that are going under, most of the sharp money is on the under in the Jets-Cowboys game, the Commanders and Broncos game. Both of those games also very low over-unders to begin with. So maybe we want to avoid some of the players from those games, the Jahan Dotsons of the world, as well as, Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup. Probably want to leave those guys on the bench. Tennessee Titans, Los Angeles Chargers, a lot of steam on the under there. Cincinnati Bengals, Baltimore Ravens, a lot of steam on the under there. And then Monday Night Football, Pittsburgh Steelers and Cleveland Browns, a lot of steam on the under there. It's wild that we saw as low of a scoring week 1 as we did, and it looks like that's reflected in the Vegas over-unders right now. Maybe this NFL season kind of gets out to a wonky start where a lot of the offenses are playing a little below their pay grade. So new this week, something that I figured I would discuss because I think it's definitely important for start-sit decisions, is some of the advanced data points. So the fast-paced games and the slow-paced games, what this essentially means is that in a neutral game script, assuming that the game is close, which most NFL games are, how fast are the offenses going to operate on average? So basically what I did is I took the pace of play of the Patriots and the pace of play of the Dolphins and averaged that out, and that essentially equaled the fastest paced game. And with all of this stuff, it is a 1 week 1-week sample size that we're going off of. It's going to get more and more predictive as we get throughout the season. Early on in the year, I would highly recommend leaning on Vegas stuff because it's a little bit more accurate than, pace of play and DVOA and, matchups and that kind of thing. So Patriots, Dolphins, Titans, and Chargers, Jaguars, and Chiefs, Minnesota Vikings, and Eagles. Looks like these Jags, Chiefs games and the Vikings and Eagles games checking a lot of boxes so far. And the slowest pace games, according to this pace of play from week 1, is the Rams, 49ers, the Falcons, Packers, the Steelers, Browns, and the Giants and Cardinals. That Steelers-Browns game not checking a lot of boxes so far. Next, we get into offensive DVOA versus defensive DVOA and kind of the advantage or disadvantage that comes of that. Basically, what this means is DVOA is a statistic that measures offenses and defenses relative to league average situations. So if you have a positive percentage in the offensive category, it means you're an above average offense. If you have a negative percentage in the defensive category, it means you're an above average defense. And basically, when you average these two out, let's take the Dolphins versus the Patriots this week, we can see that the Dolphins, as one of the best offensive DVOA teams so far in week 1, going up against the Patriots, who are about a middle-of-the-road defense, they have the biggest advantage on the week in terms of their offense versus the Patriots' defense, so on and so forth. You can see the Dolphins, Lions, Patriots, Titans, and Jaguars have pretty good matchup advantages, and then the Jets, Giants, Bengals, Steelers, and Panthers do not have good matchup advantages. And again, this data is going to get more and more predictive as we get throughout the season, but so far it is anecdotal, something that we need to keep in mind. Next, we get into shadow matchups. The red matchups mean that is a downgrade for the wide receiver, but of course, if they're a superstar wide receiver, you're still starting them anyway. It just means that you need to temper expectations, but guys who are on the fringe, maybe you want to leave those guys on your bench. Yellow matchups are, about equal. The wide receiver is about as good as the corner. It's not a huge downgrade. And then green matchups means that it's an upgrade. The opposing wide receiver is much better than the opposing corners that they're going up against, and therefore they're in a good spot to smash. So the red matchups, as you can see this week, Garrett Wilson going up against Trayvon Diggs and Stephon Gilmore, not an ideal situation for him, but he is still a stud wide receiver. He can beat those guys. I'm still comfortable starting him as a top 24 guy. Devontae Adams, not a good matchup against Tre'Davious White. Drake London, not a good matchup against Jair Alexander. Justin Jefferson struggled last year on a Thursday night game against Darius Slay. Looks like he will be matched up with him again, but of course you're still starting him. CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks going up against Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. Lamb is in your lineup, but you probably want to sit the rest of the Cowboys wide receivers. And then Terry McLaurin going up against Pat Surtain. Could be a big smash spot for Jahan Dotson this week, knowing that Surtain is going to shadow Terry McLaurin. And then it looks like the Steelers receivers have a tough matchup. Maybe you want to leave those guys on your bench, but Deontay Johnson being out does open up some volume for those guys. The one yellow matchup of the week is DJ Moore versus Carlton Davis. These guys have matched up a number of times in the past because DJ Moore used to play in the NFC South. Carlton has shadowed him pretty much every time they've played each other, and DJ Moore has actually gotten the better of him most of the time. So I will say DJ Moore not really in that bad of a spot this week. And then we have some smash positions for the Philadelphia Eagles wide receivers Smith and Brown going up against the Vikings corners, probably the worst secondary in the league. Arizona Cardinals, Marquise Brown and Michael Wilson going up against the Giants secondary, which is not very good. And then the Houston Texans, Nico Collins and Robert Woods going up against the Colts secondary, which is typically not very good, although they did show some signs of improvement in week 1. Now we get into the quarterback, running back, wide receivers, and tight ends with the top 5 easiest matchups and the top 5 worst matchups. And with this matchup data, again, please take it with a grain of salt early because we're working off of some of last year's numbers as well as just a 1-week sample in week 1 this past week. So lean more on the Vegas stuff early in the year. This stuff, definitely just use it as a tiebreaker. I would not make a decision one way or another completely based off this because we don't have the best sample size as it currently stands. So Jacksonville Jaguars, Seattle Seahawks, New England Patriots, Buffalo Bills, and Tampa Bay Buccaneers have the easiest quarterback matchups. Steelers, Jets, Colts, Ravens, and Raiders with the toughest quarterback matchups. Some takeaways from this chart basically is that you definitely want to start Geno Smith this week as a top 15 quarterback. And then, of course, Josh Allen and Trevor Lawrence are in your lineup no matter what, but they definitely are in very good position to smash this week. If you guys are playing DFS, they are good plays there. Then we get into the sits from the quarterback position. You definitely do not want to start Zach Wilson. Not that anybody was probably going to. Definitely don't want to start Kenny Pickett and Jimmy Garoppolo either. And temper expectations for Anthony Richardson and Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson with another bad week. Good chance that you're going to be able to buy really low on him in fantasy in week 3. So running back matchups, you guys can see easiest matchups for the Steelers, Giants, Buccaneers, Falcons, and Colts. Hardest matchups for the Rams, Chargers, Jets, Raiders, and Broncos. Big takeaways from here is that you probably want to be starting Rachaad White this week. He had a really good workload, had a good good matchup this week also against the Chicago Bears, who just saw Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon do some work against them. Barkley is in a smash spot, as is Bijan Robinson. Obviously, you were starting those guys, but good to know they're in a good position. Tyler Algier with the Atlanta Falcons, also a decent flex play as well. One note on Najee Harris, as you guys can see there, the adjusted fantasy points metric is still from last year, so I wouldn't take too much stock into it. So the Browns aren't quite the smash spot that they were in last year's defense. Jim Schwartz had them playing really well. They stuffed the crap out of Joe Mixon last week. So it appears that Najee Harris is in a really good matchup, but I will say the Browns defense is probably in a much better spot this year as opposed to where they were last year. And again, as soon as we get that data, I will update it. Also, as the season goes along, it should not be a problem. But big takeaways from the sits category here, you're definitely sitting the Rams running backs, Josh Kelly and Dalvin Cook as well. I know you probably spent up on Kyren Williams on the waiver wire, but I'm not starting that dude against the San Francisco 49ers. And same goes for Josh Kelly. Even though he had a good workload last week, I'm probably only starting Austin Eckler. I don't think you can start Josh Kelly this week against the Titans. And then also with the Jets running backs, you could start Breece as like a flex play, but I probably wouldn't start Dalvin Cook. Temper expectations for Eckler, Breece, Jacobs, and Javonte Williams this week at running back. Next, we get into the wide receiver position. You guys can see easiest matchups on the screen and hardest matchups on the screen. Big takeaways from here is that you definitely want to be firing up your Chargers wide receivers, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Your Seahawks wide receivers, all three of them, I think, are good starters this week. And then the Bills duo of Stephon Diggs and Gabriel Davis. The Saints duo of Chris Olave and Michael Thomas. If you're desperate, maybe Rashid Shaheed as well, but probably just those top two. And then you're probably tempering expectations for the Commanders wide receivers, especially Terry McLaurin in his tough matchup against Surtain. CeeDee Lamb has a tough matchup, like I said, against Sauce Gardner this week, so temper expectations for him. And then Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and the Dolphins duo, also tough matchups. And then Brandon Cooks, Michael Gallup, Drake London, probably on your bench altogether. Probably would not throw those guys into your lineup if I can help it. Next, we get into the tight end matchups. You guys can see the easiest and the hardest ones on the screen. Big takeaways from here is that you definitely want to be firing up Sam Laporta, who has like one of the easiest matchups of any tight end. We saw good usage in week 1. Hunter Henry, also a good starter, a good streamer this week if you guys picked him up off of waivers. Evan Ingram and Darren Waller, both in good spots this week. They were probably in your lineup regardless. And then sitting at the tight end position this week, you don't want to start Hayden Hurst in a bad game environment, a tough matchup. Adam Troutman, I don't care that Greg Dulcich is out. I'm not firing him into my lineup. And then not that you were probably starting these guys, but I would sit all of your Saints tight ends and sit all of your Jets tight ends. And then probably temper expectations for Pat Freiermuth as well. Although if he's healthy, he's probably going to be in your lineup regardless as a top 12 tight end. So DST and kicker talk for those of you guys that are sickos who still play in prehistoric league formats. You guys can see all of the kicker and defense matchups on the screen right now. Top streaming DSTs right now, if you guys are streaming your defenses, which you probably should be week over week. The Texans, Colts, Commanders, 49ers, Bucks, and Panthers are all in very good spots this week. So if those defenses are available, definitely check them out. And if you have any questions, of course, leave them down below in the comments. So that is week 2 matchups that matter. Again, if you have any feedback on this series, leave it down below. If you guys want access to my weekly rankings, to Danny's weekly rankings, to all of the information that I broke down in this video, you can get access to it by following the link in the pinned comment down below. You get it for free if you sign up with a $10 deposit on Underdog Fantasy, or you can get it on our site, flockfantasy.com, promo code FSE over there as well. We'll get you 30% off. So if that interests you, check it out in the link in the pinned comment down below. Also, be sure to check out all of our other sponsors. You can actually use this information for betting as well if you guys are betting on NFL games. So check out our sponsor, Elite Picks, who are one of the best in the business when it comes to sharp betting, and they are much more qualified to give you guys betting advice than I am. But you can use our link right now to get a sizable discount, a 7-day free trial for some picks from Pro Better. So if that interests you, check that down below in the link in the description, as well as everything else we have going on with our sponsors as well. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.